The Freddy Fazbear box just dropped at Popeyes for $7.99, and it's scary good. Garlic palm tenders and cheesy bites with marinara sauce. Upgrade to the deluxe box for $12.99 and get a 20-ounce drink in a cupcake cup. Dig in before it's too late. Try the Freddy Fazbear Crunch menu, now at Popeyes. See Five Nights at Freddy's 2, only in theaters. Love that chicken from Popeyes. Limited time at participating U.S. restaurants. Prices may vary.
Ray-Ban Meta glasses come with open-ear audio, so you can listen to your favorite music without blocking out the world around you.
Hey, Meta, play Gorgeous.
Here's Gorgeous by Doja Cat.
You can also ask Meta AI questions.
Hey, Meta, when's Doja Cat's next concert?
Doja Cat is playing at the Los Angeles Theater next Tuesday.
Sweet.
Ray-Ban Meta glasses, available at Ray-Ban stores and other authorized retailers.
At least no one was thinking about the Epstein files anymore.
For minors, do we love minors? I love minors.
We know, we all saw the birthday card. By the way, I was watching this on Fox News last night, and I had the captions on. And this is completely real. The way that it aired, you can actually see that the person doing the closed captions is also confused. And then, delete. Whoopsie. That's what Fox gets for hiring Prince Andrew to do the captions.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the tasteful partridge to Thursday's full turducken. I'm Alex.
And I'm Kenny. Turducken, really?
Yeah. Apparently Henry VIII's favourite thing. How have you been, Kenny?
It's been a very busy week. I was doing some training on Thursday and I was asking the people I was training to tell me some interesting things about themselves. And there was a good mix. There was people who'd just done some parachute jumps, and there was one woman who meditates to thrash metal, which is like Pantera. So, okay, I can see how that might work.
No, how?
You know, we all have our Spotify-style music list, and I've got a chill-out list, a discoveries list, and I've got a rage and rock list as well. It's full of all the angry stuff that I wouldn't normally play in polite company. And there's one track by the guy that used to be the singer for the Dead Kennedys, Jello Biafra. He remained an angry, agitated, center singer for years. And there's one 9-minute track that starts with just horrible feedback and then kicks in with him singing about drugs in America and the end of the world. And when I put that on, within 5 minutes I fall asleep. It's almost like my brain goes, yeah. Okay, that's enough of the real world. We're shutting down now. See you in the morning. So it might be that thrash metal is the secret meditative assistant that we all didn't know we needed. How about that?
Not for me. I tend to worry about the vocal folds. I do.
You're such a technical
No,
person.
seriously, I tend to think, I hope he warmed up and I hope he hums through his registers afterwards, because otherwise he'll have no voice tomorrow.
The vocal exercises that thrash metal singers do are top drawer. It sounds like they're just screaming aimlessly, but they wouldn't last 5 minutes if they did that.
No, they wouldn't. They must have quite a regimented routine.
Do you do a little set of exercises before you record the podcast, Alex?
Sometimes. It depends what time we're going and whether I've been talking before or not. Like if you've spent the day chatting to people, your folds are warmed up, your instruments of articulation are nicely warmed up. But if it's very early in the morning, or if you spent the entire day, I don't know, writing in front of a computer, then you can end up in a situation where your voice is a bit cold and your tongue is too big for your mouth. So I have a quick set of exercises. Trilling through the registers is the best sort of quick one, just going... Why is that funny?
Why is it not funny? That's a lovely noise. It's like the mating call, the lesser spotted...
The mating call of the lesser spotted actor. Which brings me to our Christmas appeal. It is that time of year. This holiday season, think of the podcasters who cannot afford their own studio or a junior member of staff to do socials, and search deep inside your heart and deep inside your pocket. Somewhere in Devon is a poor lad who dreams of a chair that does not creak. Somewhere in Bermondsey, another lad longs for a day off, or a night off, or an hour off. And somewhere in Mauritius, a young woman has to use a matchbox to flambe her Wagyu steak. Think of them. Think of them and give generously to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. For $5 a month, you can keep this podcast coming and free for everyone, whether they can afford or cannot afford it.
Thank you, Alex, for that. I'm quite partial to a ham around this time of year. Oh, okay, what shall we talk about today?
Well, there has been more movement on Ukraine, a new draft of Trump's so-called peace plan with some quite eye-catching stuff in it. A new set of sanctions from Europe appear to be on the way, displeasure from the Kremlin and legal action, and potential disagreement.
And I suppose, as we're being warned about the worst flu season in decades, is it fair or indeed responsible for doctors to go on strike?
Finally, as every troll crawls out from under every social media bridge to comment on Catherine Zeta-Jones' appearance, is this more an ageism issue or a sexism one, or both?
Quiet Riot.
A Turkish ferry is on fire in the port of Odessa. A British paratrooper has died while training Ukrainian soldiers. A brutal set of drone attacks designed to cut off heat to thousands of homes. All remind us this week that the relentless Russian aggression in Ukraine continues unabated despite lofty words of a peace plan. The latest draft of the US proposal contains reportedly a framework for Ukraine to become a member of the EU in as little as 1 year. Kremlin has already rejected it outright. Meanwhile, the coalition of the willing is being revealed to include some rather unwilling, with Italy and Bulgaria joining Belgium in the search for alternatives to turning frozen Russian assets into a loan guarantee for Ukraine. The fog of war, it seems, is as nothing compared to the smoke machine of diplomacy.
All right, we had a very good day today. I think we made a tremendous amount of progress, even from the last time I spoke to you, and I apologize for keeping you waiting, but there was more work to be done. You know, we began almost 3 weeks ago with a foundational document, which has been an ongoing working document. In fact, over the last 96 hours or more, there's been extensive engagement with the Ukrainian side. We arrived here today with one goal, and the goal was to take is 28 points or 26 points, depending on which version as it continued to evolve, and try to narrow the ones that were open items. And we have achieved that today in a very substantial way. Now, obviously, like any final agreement, they'll have to be agreed upon by the presidents. And there are a couple issues that we need to continue to work on. But I think the report today is that I think today was worthwhile. It was very, very, it is probably the most productive day we have had on this issue. Maybe in the entirety of our engagement, but certainly in a very long time.
Kenny, the 28-point peace plan is pretty unrecognizable since Marco Rubio took it over, isn't it? What do we know about it in its latest iteration?
Well, it's basically had a full American remodel. It's got the same address, but it's got a very different interior. It's been reworked into something that's described as being a bit more flexible, with less emphasis on territorial restitution up front and a lot more focus on things like sequencing, on ceasefires, and on the sort of confidence-building steps that Moscow might plausibly accept at some point in the future. In diplomatic terms, you could say that it's starting to be a little more realistic.
Compared to the initial one, which gave them everything for no concession. Yes, I
well
imagine.
Done, you've won.
Yes. That was basically the original, wasn't it? Well done, Russia, you won.
There's much more urgency around, let's stop the war now, and we need to really get stuck into the discussion around borders later. There's that really one eye-catching element that you mentioned in your intro as well, which is the idea that Ukraine would be earmarked to join the EU by 2027.
1st of January 2027.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about fast track, and this is the European Union we're talking about, remember, who are notorious for going to the 11th hour of
and apparently this is an element of it that the European Union has been consulted on and is happy with.
It's part of the diplomatic dance that involves pro-Kyiv Europeans, pro-Moscow Europeans, and the Americans as well. And of course, one of the issues is that not everybody in Europe sings from the same hymn sheet. And so this approach is a way of applying pressure, specifically, I think, to Viktor Orban in Hungary, who's so far been holding up Ukraine's accession process. And at the point where America swings behind them wholeheartedly, Orban really has to step back, and it's a huge diplomatic unblockage. And that timeline sounds utterly unbelievable. Bear in mind that Kyiv hasn't yet completed formally even one of the, I think it's 36 stages of accession that you go through to join the EU. So you have to say that there's a chance that if this actually came to fruition, it would really upend the bloc's merit-based approach to admitting new members, and it really would force Brussels to rethink the entire process.
Yeah, and the accession procedure completely. It would just recalibrate everything. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe forcing the EU to be responsive in that way is a good thing. Or maybe because we have had accessions that are stepped before. Not every accession has been exactly the same. There's always an end date by which you say, now you're a full member. But there have been accessions where certain states can defer certain elements of it. And so maybe they're thinking that behind the scenes they can fashion something a little bit more ad hoc, as it were. But it does seem awfully ambitious, doesn't it?
I mean, who knows? This could be the point that getting Britain closer to the EU again becomes a slightly less challenging.
Maybe.
Everybody's thinking in slightly different ways, and they have to do it with some measure of urgency as well. So it looks like what counts as a positive step. Why, Alex, do you think that a handful of countries still object to the freezing and the use of Russian assets when you might think it's pretty much sanctioning 101?
So the prime driver of this is Belgium. Belgium has a new prime minister in charge of a coalition after very complicated negotiations, as is usual in Belgium. And Bart de Wever, the 54-year-old new Belgian prime minister, is very right-wing. He's a Flemish nationalist. And that may be relevant. But the basic problem here is that the vast majority of the assets we are talking about are based in Euroclear, which is the Brussels depository that holds the assets. And if Russia was to mount a successful challenge against the expropriation of their assets, it would be Belgium specifically that would be liable to pay all of it back. Belgium started raising this point at the summit on the 23rd of October. They started going, you have to offer us some sort of alternative or some sort of guarantee that we wouldn't be left holding the baby in this. Belgium is a pretty small country, and we're
It's a
talking
huge
about
proportion of the GDP.
we're talking about
numbers.
210 billion euros worth of assets. So there is some justification for them saying that. There are other interpersonal things that also play into this. De Wever has a very poor relationship with Germany's new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, apparently. They just don't get on. There's also the further complication of Peter Moors, who's the Belgian ambassador to the EU, an extremely experienced diplomat known as the spider in the web. Very Mandelson-like figure, actually. And he was chief of staff to De Wever's predecessor. So he's part of the political machinery of the rival party, if that makes sense. So that's a poor personal relationship. And again, there's a sense that sometimes he gives the okay to things in Brussels that the prime minister hasn't agreed to. So all of that complicates stuff. There has been some movement on the European side. They have switched from the assets being used to form a loan to the Ukraine to the assets being used as a sort of advance on reparations that Russia will have to pay whenever the war ends. The American situation isn't helping because they're openly talking about unfreezing the Russian assets and just giving them back to Russia as soon as it signs any kind of peace agreement. That was in the original 28-point blueprint. The newer version, again, is talking about that being released in tranches being used in the rebuilding process. So again, that softened a little bit because the initial proposal, I have to tell you, was greeted in Brussels by one official saying Steve Witkoff needs to see a psychiatrist. Further complication, the Russian central bank, quite literally 2 days ago, is suing Euroclear in a Moscow court in response to this plan to try and injunct it, I guess, to try and stop it. But there is an advance. And one of the big obstacles to this, which is Viktor Orban's veto, was removed this week. And so I think that will give quite a lot of comfort to Belgium, because one of the big worries was that if Viktor Orban turned around and blocked the continuing freezing of the assets, because it was a thing that had to be renewed every 6 months, and countries had a veto. So at any point, Orban could turn around and say, I veto renewing the freezing of Russian assets for another 6 months, and Belgium really could be left holding the baby. What the European Commission have done is they've used a fairly softly drafted clause, Article 122 of the EU Treaty, which allows governments to decide, and I quote, in a spirit of solidarity between member states, upon the measures appropriate to the economic situation. And so they've used that clause to approve the time unlimited freezing of Russian assets. So that will no longer now need 6 monthly okays to be given by every member state. I think that removes the major blockage actually from this. And in the summit next week, I think Wednesday it is the 18th, I think we will see some movement on this. I think we might see the loan finally be approved or not. If it's not approved, then I think Belgium will be exposed as having expressed objections not for technical reasons, but because it is pro-Russia, which I don't think it is. I mean, it is a far-right government, but there's no evidence that he's, friendly to Putin, like there is evidence, for instance, with Orban. All will become clear next Wednesday, but it is shifting as we speak.
Quiet, Riot. Quiet, Riot.
I'm here today to tell you where NATO stands and what we must do to stop a war before it starts. And to do that, we need to be crystal clear about the threat. We are Russia's next target.
NATO has also intervened this week, Kenny. Mark Rutte has come out and said that Russia is only a few years away from an all-out attack against NATO. Why has he chosen to intervene now, do you think? Do you think he's talking to the world? Do you think he's talking to the Kremlin? Or do you think he's talking to so-called daddy in Washington?
The short answer is he's doing all of those things. I don't live inside his head, but I do think that he's doing this very deliberately. Mark Rutte didn't wake up one morning and decide he's going to scare Europe for fun. He's intervening now, partly because the strategic window is closing. Western defense production is still ramping up. Ukraine is still in a desperate fight for survival. And intelligence assessments inside NATO itself are converging on the same blunt conclusion that Russia is rearming faster than a lot of allies expected. And there is this worry that it could be capable of testing NATO within a few years if deterrence looks weak, or if there are other political reasons for Putin to want to make mischief. So yeah, part of this is definitely Rutte talking to the public. He's trying to jolt European governments out of peacetime habits. He's trying to justify higher defense spending. And I think he's also trying to kill the fantasy that Ukraine's a regional problem that can be tidied away quietly. And there's one other audience, of course, as well. And that's Moscow. And the message there is deterrence. It's not hysteria. Russia's not being accused of planning an imminent invasion tomorrow morning, but it's been warned that NATO is watching the medium-term build-up and it won't be caught flat-footed again. So it's not panic, it's positioning. And Rutte is also saying if a crisis comes later, nobody gets to say that they weren't warned. But you're absolutely right in that he's also very clearly talking to daddy, by which we mean Washington. And specifically, I think he's talking to an American political class that includes a president who is deeply skeptical of NATO. Rutte is signaling that this alliance still matters, the threat is real, and walking away now would be strategically reckless.
I think this is a part of the equation that's not discussed enough. If Trump wants to basically refocus America militarily towards the Pacific, which plainly he wants to do, there are actually refueling and advanced positions and bases all over the Middle East on one side and actually the Pacific on the other, that belong to the wider alliance. And there are also military assets there that belong to the wider alliance. So he must free up NATO on the east side, if that makes sense, while also not breaking it so much that if he then wants to do something in the Pacific, NATO will say, sorry, new phone, who dis? And I do think that's an aspect of the equation that's not discussed enough. Trump wants spending to go up and he wants the Russia-Ukraine situation to go away, but not at whatever cost.
That's right.
He doesn't actually want to completely break NATO because he needs NATO on the other side.
And there are people within that administration who we don't hear about, who don't sit in front of microphones, but who do think
understand that, yeah.
Exactly. And they're big picture specialists. They'll be looking at what's going on in Venezuela at the moment, and they will very much be looking at just how stretched it's possible to make America militarily and diplomatically before things start to go ping.
We were discussing, I think, 6 or 7 months ago when we had Kim Darroch on the podcast. If America ends up completely alienating its European allies, what is its closest position to the Middle East at that point? If it doesn't have the basis in Cyprus and Malta and Turkey, how does it protect its interests, which it is increasing, especially in the Arabian Peninsula? What is its closest point to that region if it doesn't have its European bases? I think part of Trump's success has been in framing NATO as a thing that only benefits Europe. And it's a mistake to fall into that narrative because NATO is a mutually beneficial arrangement that really, really does help the US as well.
The intensification of attacks and rhetoric from Moscow that we've been seeing as well as Putin has ramped up the adrenaline levels there. Do you think that's a display of strength or do you think that's a sign of weakness?
As you said, there are signals that Russia is rearming faster than anticipated. But there are also signals that its own economy is on fire and that it really can't sustain that level of spending and pivoting really the economy to a wartime model without beginning to sacrifice some pretty chunky social programs very, very soon. Let's put it this way. I think the statements Russia is making are a display of strength. I think the shrillness, speed, and volume with which it is making them is a sign of panic. If you think about it, Russia is now weakened in India because of this. Putin's recent visit to Modi may have been all hugs and kisses, but behind the scenes it's actually been a bit of a disaster in that they were pre-briefing there would be big defense deals that then didn't materialize. And despite Modi's friendly words publicly, he has actually scaled back how much oil India buys from Russia because of the Trump tariffs. Russia is significantly weakened in the Middle East. It's effectively lost Syria now, and its relationship with Iran is really, really stretched since the attack on Israel. It's weaker in its own backyard. It's facing really significant challenges in Baku in Azerbaijan. That relationship seems to be really collapsing. It's weaker in Africa, post-Prigozhin, both because I think Prigozhin was personally very important as a sort of charismatic military strongman in Russian operations in Africa, but also because Russia's attempts to centralize its control of African operations has ran into real trouble. And I might drop a link to a Ukraine Post journalist's video, a very good summary of the situation that he made on YouTube. And so Russia is strong, but it's really neglecting its influence operations in the rest of the world. And other players are stepping into that gap. Trump is stepping into that gap. China is stepping into that gap. India is stepping into that gap. Europe is stepping into that gap. Europe's plan to effectively bring the north of Africa and Turkey into a sort of zone that is included in its rules of origin, that is also a big deal for Russia. It is expanding into areas where Russia has been influential traditionally. And so Russia is strong, but it senses that there is a time horizon after which it begins to weaken, and weaken rapidly and dramatically. It's strong, but tired.
My take on it has been for some time that real strength doesn't need constant theatrical threats. Real strength delivers outcomes. That's what it does. And Russia, wherever you look on the planet, has not been delivering. And that can't go on forever. Effectively, their economy is a war economy now. I think defense spending is north of 6% of GDP. It's eye-watering. Inflation is sticky. There are labor shortages that have been caused because of the mobilization of young troops. Sanctions are working slowly, but not dramatically. And the discussions we've had about reserves being frozen have had an impact as well. So it's not an economy that's about to keel over right now, but it is burning through huge resources to sustain the war. And it is having a huge impact on Russian influence elsewhere in the world.
And also, sorry, just to add to that, that long term as well, if you think Europe has problems with population decline, I mean, Russia's population was falling off a cliff anyway since the early 2010s. But now, having sent every young man it can spare to the front line and hundreds of thousands of people having died, its population is really suffering. And when you pair that with a very isolationist philosophy that is incredibly hostile to any immigration, that creates a whole new problem for Russia.
I think one other point that we should probably make is, of course, that Zelensky and Ukraine are also incredibly weak right now. So we're seeing two sides, both of whom are drained by what's been going on in recent years. And I do hope, I suppose, that this might actually be a time when both sides might be very actively open to concessions. I don't know what your view on that is.
Zelensky has had a tough period, not just because of the White House's behavior, which will have, it will have an impact domestically, in political terms, I mean. It will get people thinking, do we maybe need someone who is capable of having a better relationship with Trump? And there's also been a sort of corruption probe that's involved quite senior people. That has weakened him politically. And there have been a couple of military miscalculations that have not paid off. And so that is being talked about as well. We are dealing with two sides, I think, who are at the weakest point they have been throughout this. And so maybe now is the time to secure a sort of negotiated settlement. But the wider dimension of that is that if you also see Ukraine as the front line for Europe and the front line for NATO, then the concessions that even Zelensky and Ukraine are willing to make may be unpalatable for Europe as a whole.
Quiet, Riot. Quiet, Riot.
Headache, nausea, fatigue, a sense that something nasty is spreading fast and no one can quite agree on the treatment. These are all symptoms of a problem that affects us every year, but seems particularly bad this year. I'm talking, of course, about politics. And, of course, the so-called super flu.
I thought you were talking about Reform UK there for a moment.
Quick, bring my inoculation. Alongside a winter surge in influenza cases, Britain is now dealing with a rapidly escalating political infection. NHS leaders are warning that hospitals are filling up fast. Epidemiologists argue that the virus itself isn't new, but immunity is low and the system is brittle. And into that mix has stepped the Prime Minister, using a Guardian article to warn that a doctor strike during a flu surge would be, in his words, beyond belief.
I want to thank all the NHS staff who always step up during the winter period to deal with flu or whatever else. We do need to take precautions. There's no difference in the guidance, so we're not changing guidance on face masks, but the usual things about ventilation, washing hands, and just being careful when you're around people who are vulnerable is the guidance. It's common sense, and I think most people would want to behave in that way. I'm very concerned with the action of the BMA. They are being irresponsible, in my view. We have already put in place quite a significant pay rise. There are other issues that they're concerned about, which we've been listening to, and we put an offer on the table to deal with those issues. But that offer can only go forward if they don't take strike action, particularly in the run-up to Christmas, particularly when we've got a problem with flu. It would be irresponsible of BMA to push through. And I think for many resident doctors, in their heart of hearts, they probably don't want to do this. So I'd just say to the BMA, do the responsible thing, accept the offer that's on the table, and we can all move forward.
Yes, Britain does have a flu problem, but the symptoms you're seeing right now are just as much about power, about blame, and about a struggling NHS as they are about viruses.
I remember as early as September being told by a couple of people in the know that this year flu will be really bad. Why is that? Is it a new strain or?
It is a new strain, and it's a tricky strain to deal with, but it's no more dangerous or challenging than the sort of strains we're usually facing at this time of year. What we're really facing here is a perfect storm of medicine and politics. Now, flu has come early this winter. This surge in cases has happened a week or two sooner than we would normally expect. And it does look like it will be a particularly nasty season because of the mutated version. While plenty of people are calling it a super flu, it's actually not more severe or any harder to treat. I think that's an important point to make. We're not staring down the barrel of a COVID epidemic here, let's put it like that. But hospitals have been struggling for some years now, A&E departments in particular. And into this mix blunders, I suppose, the row over resident doctors' pay.
And the number of training places, which I think is one of the really sore points, isn't it? Because there's a bunch of doctors at the moment waiting to do their residencies, the last bit of their training, who can't get into it. And that's why the latest attempt by the government to resolve the deadlock has been to quadruple training places going forward from next year on. The other day, I even caught the Prime Minister being asked about face masks.
Yeah.
I can't remember that conversation rearing its head since 2021.
The bottom line is the situation could be worse than in other years, or it might just be that the whole winter flu cycle has been shuffled forwards, presumably because of this particular mutation.
Do you think that might be significant? Because those few weeks early might mean that then people socialize over Christmas at the sort of height of this wave.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. But what we should be clear is that the data we have so far can't really tell us what's going to happen. It all becomes guesswork. And we're watching people go out and get their inoculations. These inoculations usually take a couple of weeks to kick in. So we might be looking at the peak effectiveness of that around about Christmas Day itself. So it's a risky time, but it's not in itself unusual. It's just that it's been brought forward. There was a really very, very good thread on Blue Sky from one of our alumni, actually, Professor Christina Pagel at UCL. And she did a Blue Sky thread earlier in the week asking, is it a super flu year? Now, she knows her data. She knows a lot about how COVID impacted. And, she made some very valid points. She said, yes, the number of people in hospital with flu has gone up 55% this week. But that would be normal in the upswing of a winter flu season in general. Yes, equally the peak has got to come ahead of us, but that's literally what it means to be in the upward phase. And she does some comparisons between this year's flu wave and previous years, and the pattern is the same. It's just that it's been moved forwards. So the biggest increase in admissions this year was last week, the week just gone, 69% of admissions. But that also is normal for the rising phase of a flu season, whenever that rising phase happens. At a similar point in the first wave last year, the increase was 61%. The year before, it was 70%. In other words, the figures are really quite familiar and fairly standard.
So what's the problem then? Like, why are we hearing so much about it? Is it an attempt to scare people early enough to have their vaccination, basically? Is that what we're seeing?
I don't know if it's about scaring people to have their vaccination early. Certainly, the looming doctor strike comes into it. How could it not in Westminster? There's definitely a ramping up of the rhetoric. And the very fact that the Prime Minister has decided to do an exclusive with The Guardian this weekend speaks to just how important the government sees this as a political issue as well as being an important national health issue. The big question is not a political question. The big question at this stage is whether this year's flu season will peak soon, which will mean we've got a normal flu season. We've got a normal, serious flu wave. It's just been shifted earlier. Or, as you hinted could happen because of timing, whether it keeps going up and only peaks towards the end of the year, in which case it will be officially a terrible flu season. But the data that we have can't tell us that. We just don't have those figures to hand. So the NHS finds itself in a position where hospitals and A&E units in particular are already under stress, where people being treated in corridors is now the norm. not the exception to the rule, and a health system that for some years now has not really been fit for purpose when it comes to dealing with these incredibly regular and incredibly predictable happenings every single year at this time.
I have to say that I've seen 2 bits of polling that show support for this doctor's strike is a lot softer than it was for previous ones. Even if you don't adjust for don't knows, basically, which are about 10%, there's over 50%, 53%, I think, was the YouGov figure of people who oppose it. But also, if you look at just the strongly, like the people who feel strongly about this, only 13% strongly support it, while 31% strongly oppose it. That's really quite a big gap.
There's a difficult balance to be struck here, and we do have doctors, nurses, other medical people among our listeners, and they're going to have quite different views. In short, it's very understandable that industrial action might take place in winter, but at the same time, it's extremely combustible as an issue. Doctors don't choose winter peaks for fun. We should be really clear about that. They strike them because pay erosion, because of burnout, because staffing gaps are already harming patients all the year round. And there is a view that if you never strike at the worst moment, you never strike at all.
They're doing a rational thing. They're maximizing their negotiating power. I mean, that's what strikes are about.
The deeper failure, I think my biggest disappointment about what's going on is that it's come to this at all. This is an ongoing, relentless set of challenges that we faced, and there doesn't seem to be a plan to stabilize the NHS for these very predictable waves of infections over the winter period.
Okay, so from an economics point of view, I'm not advancing this before people get outraged, but from an economics point of view, I think the problem is that if you have an organism that is able to absorb completely any peak, however bad it gets, it means that you also have a lot of unused capacity and inefficiency the rest of the year, if that makes sense. If you are running an NHS that is efficient, it will always face severe difficulties during its busiest time of the year, because there's no way to make it efficient the rest of the time if you're only using that high ceiling as the target. The second point is that I think doctors are rightly worried about the levels of recruitment and retention. As a lefty, I would deny nobody, absolutely nobody, their right to strike, because no employer, however important and however laudable and public, no employer has a right to your product. No employer has a right to your work. If you feel that the situation you're working in is unacceptable and the money you're being paid is not enough, it is absolutely your right to say, I'm not doing this. Having said that, it feels to me also like, because of a long period of austerity, there is now a reflex to go to strike a little bit too quickly and maybe without having exhausted all other avenues. And to me, it feels a little bit like this has happened here. While I completely understand doctors' concerns about their own profession and defend their right to fight for the best possible terms they can get, there is, I think, also a need for solidarity across the public sector and across the NHS. If you're working in the same hospital where nurses had to go away and be happy with 4%, and now you're striking while the cleaners are getting minimal uplifts to their salary, you also have to think that it creates a wider problem, I think, for a government that's struggling to balance the books. I don't know where the line is for balancing that, but it seems to me like the BMA has fractionally misjudged this in terms of public relations.
Quiet, Riot. Quiet, Riot.
Catherine Zeta-Jones is 56. She looks, in my view, a very good 56, one of many very good 56s since there's no universal standard. A lot of social media users apparently disagree. When she made an appearance at a For Your Consideration event to promote Netflix series Wednesday, in which she plays Morticia Adams, a TikTok interview and some photos got a torrent of abuse almost exclusively aimed at her appearance. The backlash sparked a widespread defense of Zeta-Jones, including a lot of professional people from her industry, but also a viral video on Facebook in which a user said, quite rightly, I think, you bully women when they get too much work done, and you bully them when they don't have enough.
You've won Miss Great Britain Classic for 2025, proud to be the oldest winner of the title, and you've come in today without makeup on for a reason.
To prove a point, because what's the template for a 50-something woman to look like anyway? What am I supposed to look like at 58? Who am I supposed to be emulating? I just look like me. Everything that's been said to Catherine Zeta-Jones about how she looks because she's supposed to look too old is complete and utter nonsense. I mean, ageing is a privilege. And if we can do that the best way that we can, I think that's the most important thing, really. I mean, I take care of myself, obviously, but not to look younger, just to look better and to look healthy and to look well. Men don't have this sell-by, use-by date that women do. I mean, I couldn't even tell you how old Tom Cruise is or how old George Clooney is to even speculate as to whether they look too old for their age, and they don't get the sort of comments levelled at them that women do.
Is it aging that sparks this sort of visceral response? Or is it more specifically women aging publicly? Do we still secretly long for the era when stars like Greta Garbo became recluses rather than allow their fans to see them age? Kenny, you are in a PR environment that in many ways deals with the front end of this, but you also come from a tabloid environment, which in many ways is the supply side, let's say, of this kind of story. So what do you think about it?
What really stood out to me, what occurred to me when I saw this social media storm blow up was how different sections of our superstar network, if you like, are treated differently by the media, which feeds into what happens in the social media world. It really occurred to me that if we looked at what is happening to Catherine Zeta-Jones, it's not what would happen if mainstream media was discussing, for example, the royal family.
That's true.
It's not just as simple as we always have a downer on women as they get older and we don't have the same downer in men, much as that is very much the case. But the short answer is that one group is policed, and that's the group that Catherine Zeta-Jones finds herself in, and it's by far the biggest group. But the other group is protected. So when someone like Catherine Zeta-Jones ages in public, and how could she? How dare she age in public? But influential elements, not everybody, but influential elements within the media treat it as some sort of a problem to be solved. Her face becomes a story. Her confidence becomes brave. You know, how condescending is that? Her continued success invites the inevitable speculation about surgery, about denial, about vanity, about delusion. You know, pick your own horrible words. And the tone is quite forensic, it's quite scolding, and it's often obsessed with whether somebody like her is doing aging properly. Royals, and it's a really good example, parts of the royal world are wrapped in narrative bubble wrap. You know, when a royal that is liked ages, that is framed as dignity. Or
venerable. They become venerable.
Grace. It's duty etched into the face of this great public servant.
I think I've actually heard that being said.
It wouldn't surprise me. You'll have heard other things. You know, you'll have heard that wrinkles show the character of this person, that grey hair is statesmanlike. If any sort of cosmetic work is done, it's either ignored or it's being praised for being, it's subtle. And if the royals retreat from view, it's because of privacy concerns. And if they reappear, it's because they're resilient. The language is completely different when a group is being protected rather than policed. And the key difference really from the media perspective is permission. Which of these groups has actually been given permission to age? Zeta-Jones and people like her are very much treated as a public property. Their bodies are open for comment because fame is framed as being something that's transactional, whereas royals are treated as being an institution. And critiquing their appearance feels very much like an attack on the nation. So it's softened, it's aestheticized, or it's avoided.
It's batty, right?
Oh, it's mad.
It's so strange to treat talent as a privilege, but hereditary title as not, as a burden, as a public burden. It's actually crazy.
And it's crazy to view somebody's success as being something worthy of mockery just because they happen to be 10 years older. It's not just obscene. It doesn't make any sense. And let's remember, we've got an aging population. We talk often in this podcast about the population crisis, about the demographic time bomb. We're, as a nation, becoming older. At some point, it probably would make a lot of sense for us to start treating other people who, like us, are growing older with, it's not even dignity, is it? It's just be sensible about it. Give them a fair crack.
The interesting thing about the Catherine Zeta-Jones situation is that this was a sort of grassroots tabloid trawling, as opposed to put out there by the Daily Mail to get clicks. And I'm not sure that they don't want to see people age, or do they not want to see women age? And I think it's more specific than that, you see. I think it's about beauty, specifically. Because I don't remember, for instance, Jamie Lee Curtis or Sigourney Weaver. They are beautiful women, but Catherine Zeta-Jones was a generation's pin-up. And so maybe it's about not wanting to see the person that used to give them a boner 30 years ago having aged. These men, and it is primarily men, react in such a vile way because it makes them conscious of their own aging. I remember making a mental note when First Wives Club came out, how all those women have been in the public eye roughly the same amount of time. But every vile comment was directed at Goldie Hawn. Everyone sort of accepted Bette Midler the way she looked now. Everyone accepted Diane Keaton the way she looked now. But Goldie Hawn got a lot of grief for having plastic surgery or whatever. We sort of want women to disappear whenever they're in transition, because there's only space in our heads for ingenue, mother, crone.
Margot, you haven't got any age.
Miss Channing is ageless. Spoken like a press agent.
I know what I'm talking about. After all, they're my plays.
Spoken like an author. Lloyd, I'm not 20-ish. I'm not 30-ish. 3 months ago, I was 40 years old. 40. 4-0. That slipped out. I hadn't quite made up my mind to admit it. Now I suddenly feel as if I've taken all my clothes off.
Week after week, to thousands of people, you're as young as you want.
As young as they want, you mean? Bill's 32. He looks 32. He looked at 5 years ago. He'll look at 20 years from now. I hate men.
I'm fascinated by the language that we use. I'm also really very conscious that it's two middle-aged blokes discussing this. And listeners, if you've got your own views on this, drop us a line at the usual places. But the language that is used around this is significant in itself. Phrases like, she's aged very well. Well, who the hell is anybody else to stand up on a pedestal and decide whether somebody has aged very well or not? The immediate inference is that if that person has aged well, this person has not aged well. And beauty has always been treated as a gift that is very different to other gifts. We talk about it in a very different way. And what this does is reminds me that if we're ever going to be serious about dealing with this issue, there are some things that we should do. Obviously, we need to starve the rubbish. It's just avoid the temptation to click on stuff like this, whether you find it on social media or legacy media. Call it out when you see it. If it offends you, well, name it. Reward the better stuff as well. But I think most important of all, we should be checking our own reflexes. So if your first thought on seeing an older woman in the spotlight is about her face rather than her work, it's okay to say that's not a personal failing. It's cultural training, but it needs to be unlearned. And if you're going to unlearn it, then unlearn it out loud and encourage other people to do the same thing.
I would add one thing to that list, and that is to reflect a little bit internally about our thoughts on aging. There are genuinely two ways to look at it. You can look at it as a sort of gradual deterioration, which it undoubtedly is. But you can also look at it as an incredible privilege. I mean, my mother used to say, there's only one alternative to getting older. And actually, every year you add to your life, every birthday you celebrate, it's a massive boon. I'm still alive. And with that, yet again, I think we have put the world to wrongs, probably, today. I mean, huge apologies. This is who was doing Sunday school today. This was in the news. And so, yes, ideally, it would have been better to have Naomi giving her view on this, but it should be a refreshing change to hear from two middle-aged men who don't think in the same way that these trolls do. So that's it for today.
And listeners, whether you think the world is now a better place or not, please don't forget to quietly like, subscribe, leave us a review, back us on Ko-Fi, and visit our online bookshop too. That will at least make our world a better place.
We'll be back on Thursday with our regular midweek show, the last one before the holidays, and then we have some very special stuff planned. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and remember to keep on rioting. Quietly, but with purpose.
We love you all. Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
Right, energy.
We can do this.
Yeah,
Come
all
on.
right, man. Jesus Christ. You know this is going to end up at the end of the podcast, don't you?
When I train people to do presentations and to work with the media, quite often you come up against folk who you stick a microphone in front of them and they just don't want to open their mouth, far less have any energy. And so one of the tricks that I use is that I get them all to pretend that they're a Brazilian football commentator where Brazil have just scored the winning goal in the World Cup. It never, ever fails. Everybody comes off the back of that feeling a little bit stupid.
Okay, calm down now a little bit because you're knocking the microphone about, yeah?
But it's so exciting. All right, let's do this.
And everybody is tired. All of the Ukrainians I know they've just kind of had enough. It's been remorseless. We've seen a massive uptick in bombing by Russia of Ukrainian cities over the New Year period, Kiev, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, and so on.
I'm Arthur Snell. I spent 2 decades as a British diplomat in places like Iraq, Afghanistan and Yemen. I ran the International Prevent programme for a while, and now I'm the host of the Behind the Lines podcast, where we get the leading experts on global issues, from Argentina to Zimbabwe, from places you hear a lot about like Ukraine and the Middle East, to things that we barely hear mentioned like Myanmar. My guests are informed, insightful and invaluable guides to what's happening in this crazy world.
Yeah, hi, I'm Christopher Steele.
I'm James Barr.
I'm Gaia Vince.
It's very, very clear that the amount of food being distributed from these centres is not enough.
I'm Dr. Emma Bryan.
I'm Dan Kazita.
It's like a dog that chases a bus, you know, and then one day it catches the bus, it just runs headlong into that. What the hell do we do now? The sound of a dog actually catching up with a bus.
What we need to be talking about is fascism and how to challenge fascist ideas.
My name's Helena von Bismarck.
So I'm Zoe Gardner.
It's left Xi Jinping with a lifetime conviction that chaos is to be avoided at all costs.
I'm Emily Thornberry. I'm the Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury, and I am now the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
I'm Romy Kukratsky. I'm the managing editor of the New Voice of Ukraine.
I don't think the West have any wish for Ukraine to win, because Ukrainian win means a collapse of Russia. What they want to bring balance back.
I say to my students, I think this is a moment very similar to when I was a student. The Cold War was ending, the Berlin Wall was falling, and it seemed like a moment of immense opportunity, but it was also a moment in which everything was changing quite dramatically.
Behind the Lines is your essential guide to the international scene. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.